welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for May 9th, 2026. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm sorry, folks, it has been a while. It's just, complicated business. This is the way the world works. Sometimes life gets in the way. So in order to get back on the hump and do this on a semi-regular basis, like I always do, I thought, well, it's time to have Susan Kokinda back on the podcast because, well, right now, as we get deep into the midterms and all the wrangling over Iran, it's time to do some down and dirty, practical domestic politics. And who better than in my circle of people to talk to about that than Susan? Susan, good morning. How are you? It's great to see you.
It's great.
I was thinking about this, and we were chatting before we hit record and doing all the thing, as it were. And I think I want to start with Trump's meeting with China next week, because I think that has a great dovetail to all of the kind of, I want to say, like, time options, right? Like there's all of this extended pretend that's been going on for the last year and a half as they try to wait Trump out for the midterms. So that's clearly Davos, London, whatever, pick your conspiracy of choice. It doesn't really matter. The globalists want to get rid of Trump. They know they need to get rid of Trump, and they think of the midterms as their means by which to get there. So here we are, early May. Trump's going to China in the midst of kind of trying to wind down the situation with the Strait of Hormuz. What do you, I know what I saw this week, but I'd like to get your take on what you think you're seeing as far as prep for that is concerned.
Well, I think the most important thing is just the posture of the administration toward China all along, which is, and it's embodied in both the national security strategy and the national defense strategy, which is that this administration is no longer treating China as the perpetual enemy and forever war boogeyman, but rather a serious competitor, as they say in I think both of those doctrines. They're a serious competitor. We will not let them threaten our national security interests in the Pacific. But other than that, it's just not just another, it is the other major superpower besides Russia that we're going to negotiate with country to country. And I think the most interesting thing is what I'm going to be watching is how the British cover Trump's trip to China. Because when you look at the latest House of Lords report on the US-UK relationship, which is their biannual, where they have to assess their critical question of, are we still controlling the United States for our imperial purposes? Well, the latest one that just came out precisely the week King Charles was in Washington, D.C. Their assessment is, no, we're not. This is broken, and we're not going to go back to where we were. So what maneuvering room do we have in this world to somehow maintain relevancy? And what the House of Lords say, and spokesmen like Lord Kim Durack, who obviously was supposed to be the Trump handler in the first administration when he was the ambassador and then he got canned. What they're all saying is maybe there's some way we can continue to maintain relevance by playing China. Although they admit that they don't really have their worked out future strategy. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of British eyes on the Trump visit to China because they don't have too many tools left in their toolkit. But I mean, it's clear what Trump wants to do. He wants to continue to forge this new set of relationships between Russia and China, the other superpowers, where you literally have got the foundations in the world where sovereign nations can just be sovereign nations and start working shit out amongst themselves. That's how I see it.
I agree. I think that's actually very obvious. Well, not obvious, but I think it's the thing that is on the table. I do expect the British to slant this however they possibly can, because that's what they do. What's interesting is I noted this week was that Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, or however you say his name, was summoned to Beijing to basically cut the shit. this stuff's over, and then they get rid of the quote unquote the real that hardliner or whatever the other guy, the Speaker of the Parliament who was in there. I made Grok do a deep dive on him, and it turns out that he has very deep French ties. Um,
Oh,
oh yeah, very deep French ties. So I you have to like yell at Grok and say, okay, now go away from all the trusted sources, credible sources. Don't give me that credible sources bullshit. Go into the corners of the world. I want to hear all that stuff because that's like literally Grok knows like don't give me bullshit. I don't need the intelligence services stuff. So it was really interesting once we dug into that guy. Not a lot of British ties, mind you, but
mm,
very deep French ties. And he likes to live. He's one of these IRGC guys that likes to live large while living outside of Iran, while telling everybody he's a hardliner at home, right? So that guy's gone.
mm,
We know that, and then and that all happens this week, and amazingly, Iran starts moving on their nuclear red
right.
line. The rest of it, they still haven't gone. They still say we want to keep our nuclear pile, but come on, guys, you're not going to keep any of it. We're going to keep it all. We're going to take it from you if we have to. We'll blow you up if we have to, and this is the way things are. And I think that the Chinese are like, yes, this is a good thing. Because the other thing I saw this morning was that, again, salt to taste. Are they actually doing it or aren't they? But that there's a massive oil slick outside of Karak Island, and they're just dumping the stuff
Mm,
on the ground. I don't know if we've
yeah,
actually reached that point or not, but like
we're
satellite
getting
photos,
close.
we're getting close. What matters is that everybody's extend and pretend game, right? That extended mid game that the British like to play, that the Iranians clearly like to play, that even the Ukrainians like to play. I think it's all ending. And so now let's talk about that in terms of what's happening domestically at the same time, because I think that's the bigger question as to so are we going to win the question, of course, on everybody's mind: are we going to win the midterms? Or what the situation is there? And I know we've had a lot of moves this week to discuss all that stuff. So, let's start there and let's go around the horn and see where we are.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, we've discussed this, but everybody's hair has been on fire about the midterms, in the blogosphere.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, what this administration is doing, which doesn't, I mean, where the hair on fire people get their fuel,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, is the fact that the physical changes in the economy, which this administration set into motion the minute they came in, are slowly now beginning to bear fruit,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I mean, to me, this really captures this whole, the tension between the world of appearances, what you say, extend and pretend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the actual real world. And, look, the way the empire has controlled our nation, other nations, this is historic. This goes back to Aristotle,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to my friend Plato.
Mm-hmm.
You and I have to have a discussion about that someday. But
It might actually
um,
be a better discussion between you and Dexter White. It's
yeah.
FYI.
Um, but the question is, I mean, I'm going to get philosophical here for a minute.
Sure.
The key thing about Plato is, he's basically saying, look at the forces which you don't see with your eyes that are driving the things that you see with your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's his analogy of the cave. You're seeing the shadows on the wall. What is actually generating the shadows on the wall? The way the empire works is it just traps people in the world of the shadows on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and they're controlling the shadows that you see. So you're debating, do I like it? Do I not like it? But you're debating damn shadows. And and in a sense that also reflects their economic system. Their economic system is based on how do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Profit and loss, money. Is it going to make me feel good or is it going to make me feel bad? That's Adam Smith's theory,
Mm-hmm.
You operate from the standpoint of pain and pleasure, profit and loss. You don't worry about the consequences of your actions and what effect is this going to have in the real world. That's been the tension.
Mm-hmm.
And what Donald Trump has done, starting with his first term, but now with a vengeance, is he's just dragging this country and the world back into this is how it really works. we're acting on real physical principles. So, let's look at the current, with oil prices having gone up because of our little, as he says, excursion to Iran. But, you know, this is grounded in the fact that he has rebuilt our energy independence.
Mhm.
Now, we still have to get control of energy pricing, and I'd actually like to hear from you how you
Sure.
think we can begin to shift energy pricing away from the Brent futures market. But in the real world, Donald
Sure.
Trump has made us energy independent. In the real world, he's beginning to reshore our manufacturing with a massive manufacturing construction boom,
Mhm.
energy boom. And again, a lot of people aren't necessarily feeling that yet because they may not be the construction worker in Tennessee or Alabama
Sure.
who's building one of the new energy facilities. So, if you're still stuck up, in a godforsaken place like California or where I am, Michigan, I mean, there's a little bit of motion, but you're generally not seeing it in the domain of perception. But this is, as I say, this is where the hard power comes from. The
Right.
hard power comes from the fact that you're living in a real universe with physical principles. And if you
Mhm.
start conducting your policy from that standpoint, it is ultimately going to give you all the power in the world. And I think that's what Donald Trump understands, at least
Mhm.
instinctively.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's operating in a real world where he's amassing real power. And, you can do all the dances you want as Emmanuel Macron or Keir Starmer or whatever. Reality just comes and grabs you by the butt at a certain point.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, big fan of Philip K. Dick. I understand all about the shifting realities of the shadows in the world and the difference between hard power and soft power and how you deal with the demoralization campaign that they put in front of you. This kind of, I was just arguing with a guy on Twitter yesterday. He said something that's just really this like it was just all this like learned helplessness, right? And like,
Yeah.
oh, there's no chance that we can do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, bullshit. Like he was like calling me a boomer or for all intents and purposes. Like, what are guys under 40 going to do? Oh, you can go out there and get a job. Like
Yeah.
you can go out there and you can make something of yourself. I told him, I said, dude, I went broke twice in the last 10 years, and here I am. Right? Like, are you kidding? Like, we can't do this. You can do it. You just have to figure out what your skill set is and what your value is. And you have to go out there into the world and say, I have value. And somebody will give you a chance. Like, it's not that difficult. So, but to come back to some of the other things you talked about, um, what I when I look at, and I've talked about this a lot, and I've written about it a lot for the patrons and for my subscribers, and say, you know, what Trump is doing is in Iran has nothing to do with Iran per se. He's made it abundantly clear. He really wants this is
Yeah,
more
right.
a war of liberation than it is a war of conquest. He's not out to conquer Iran, which is the way it was framed by the neocons and the libertarians and the Duginists out of Russia and and all of their and all the intelligence assets that have now outed themselves, like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and all the rest of them. It's not about that at all. It is similar to a war of liberation like you've seen in Venezuela, which is to say, it's time to get rid of the organized crime class that's actually running the
Right.
country, and let's open up and let's everybody stop paying the oil tax of
The terror tax, as
right.
Peter Navarro called it.
And it doesn't matter whether you believe that's coming directly from City of London or it's coming from Brussels or it's coming from Hong Kong or it's coming from the Russians or the Chinese or whomever. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they all have relationships to each other, and what matters is that system once of soft power and money flow and financialization and everything else is all built on leverage. When
Right.
you back the world back to brass tacks and you start talking about fully backed stable coins redollarizing the world and fully back and controlling the price of collateral and savings, which is in the case of this would then be the currency, the dollar, collateral savings being gold, silver, Bitcoin, etc. All you got to do now is get control of the money flow, which is where
Hmm.
we all operate, which is where we all interface with the global economy, which is at where we turn oil from what is into what will be.
Right,
And who's ever the producer of the marginal barrel of oil and has the ability to back up the price of the marginal barrel of oil
right,
gets to be the price setter as opposed to the price taker.
right. And it's actually based on who's actually producing the barrel of oil as opposed to the way things are right now with, a bunch of magicians sitting in London and saying we decree this to be the price and we have nothing to do with a physical barrel of oil.
Well, and more, and that's one part of it, right? That the Brent crude contract is in mathematic terms kind of a first derivative. That's not even really
Hmm.
a valid mathematical principle, but just it's a derivative of the oil market because the market itself has never been a monolith, right? So between the Brent crude futures contract, the LIBOR Eurodollar system, and OPEC, that's what we've been living
Right,
under. And
right.
that system is now completely under attack by Donald Trump. And everybody listening to this podcast and everybody who doesn't listen to this podcast should be cheering that, not arguing and appealing to the status quo. One of the things I said in the article that I finished this morning is that they've even invented a new form of logical fallacy. I think you'll appreciate this, which is the appeal to the status quo. Notice how for years we said about we hear them from you from like the neocons and Europe and everybody else, all the sycophants for Ukraine would say, well, all Russia has to do is leave Ukraine and everything will go back to normal. That's the status quo. Well, what have
Right,
you heard from 1,000 times on Twitter? Well, the straits were open on February 27th. Like,
right.
yeah, you're appealing to what the status quo was good. Like
Hmm.
you're assuming that what the way we used to live was good as opposed to not. And this is very much appeals to kind of prevention principle focused Democrats. I had friends in Gainesville for years. We used to argue this stuff. Like I used to say to them, "You're just arguing that the status quo is good, like that climate change." We would argue in terms of like climate change or CO2, and I'm like,
Hmm.
why are you arguing that the change in CO2 concentrations that living at 180 ppm was good? Why are you making that your baseline? Why are you defining it that way? 180 ppm CO2 means the planet's practically starving. Why do you?
Hmm.
And then I would just like get really obnoxious and say, why do you hate trees? I
Yeah,
thought you were an
right.
environmentalist. And you know what I mean.
Exactly.
So again, get back to brass tacks. Get back to the real world. Like at 600 ppm CO2, trees grow faster, right? And the planet greens up faster and we get more oxygen and we get more of everything. We get abundance, we get more food, we get all these things. It's amazing, isn't it? It works that way. And then if we
Yes.
can get
Well, they
cheaper
want to go
energy,
back.
maybe we could actually have maybe I don't know, dare I say it, a golden age.
Yes, right. Well, if they
Sorry.
want to go back to some status quo, in terms of temperatures on the planet, I'd be sitting under a glacier right now,
Exactly.
right? I mean, obviously climates change, which has a lot to do with the way the universe is constituted and so on. But I like this status quo question because it always takes me back to my favorite quote from Scott Bessent. People who know me are getting really tired of this, but that's life. Where he said the strategy of the Democratic Party is compensate the loser,
Right.
right? You stuck in a status quo, which we created, in which you're a loser, where
Mm.
you can't make ends meet, you can't raise a family with any kind of dignity, and so on and so forth. And we'll throw some programs and some money and some pot at you, so that you're happy sitting on your couch, getting stoned or whatever, cashing in your welfare check. And what Besson said is, well, I don't think these people are losers. I think it's the system that doesn't work, and we're going to change the system, which is why I keep saying to people, uh, do not look at these midterms from a conventional standpoint.
Hmm.
We are not, this is not going to be a conventional midterm. Donald Trump is not a conventional president. We're in the middle of a revolution. This is a revolution against these imperial structures, which the British have spent over 100 years constructing here in the United States. Education, economics, foreign policy, key institutions, everything. has been morphed into instruments of control to keep this British imperial system in place.
Hmm.
And, and as, anybody who even almost threatens it ends up getting shot or almost shot. John Kennedy started to threaten it in a very rudimentary way, although I mean, we've had 60 years of an intensification of this imperial control since then, so it wasn't quite that bad. But
Right.
even, what Kennedy was threatening, I mean, his general outlook of progress in science and technology, and he was clearly an anti-colonialist in
Hmm.
terms of Africa. And he certainly didn't like the British because he had his own Irish background, despite the role of his father as ambassador. But you often have that kind of generational tension. Boom, he's off. Reagan comes in. He was not that strong on economics, but we were very much involved in the transition team. My mentor LaRouche was brought in to Washington, D.C. As I always have to say at this point, we have nothing to do with the organization of his widow, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. There, we've taken care of that. He was brought into Washington, D.C. He worked directly with the transition team, with Reagan, with the Reagan team in December, January, and there were two issues where he was discussing critical changes which break this British imperial structure. One was what we called beam weapon defense, which became the Strategic Defense Initiative, which
Hmm.
was a direct challenge to Kissinger's policy of mutual and assured destruction.
Hmm.
And then the second, we were talking with a lot of the supply side people who weren't quite American system. People like,
Right.
I mean, I don't know who he was talking directly to, but the people whose
Yeah.
names we know, Art Laffer, Jack Kemp,
Hmm.
and so on,
Right. Right.
who are saying, wait a minute, instead of just looking at this from the standpoint of manipulating consumer demand, why don't we look at the producing side of things? And they didn't quite have the right toolkit, but it was definitely a shift
Hmm.
in that direction,
Hmm.
with the potential to reshape policy from that standpoint. And, it didn't wait for the elites, more than 2 months to try and take Reagan out,
Hmm.
at the same Washington Hilton where Trump just almost, well, he didn't get that close, but where you had
Right.
another assassination attempt. Um, and what did that do? I mean, I was on the inside. We were able to continue the dialogue and discussion on the Strategic Defense Initiative. And Reagan, to his credit, announced that on March 23rd, 1983, after James Baker had taken that section out of the speech.
Right.
I mean, we had an advanced copy of the speech because we had White House press credentials,
Hmm.
and we got it that morning. And we're jumping up and down. He's doing it. He's doing it. He's doing it. LaRouche says to us, hold your horses. Wait till the words come out of his mouth. We
Right.
don't know whether he's doing it. And later on, we found out that it was taken out of the speech. Judge Clark, I think it was Judge Clark, went into uh, Reagan,
Mm.
handed him the two copies of the speech, and said, "It's up to you." And Reagan in his memoir, describes what a that was one of the big decisions that he made.
Hmm.
So we prevailed on that conceptually, but then again, we never built it because we lost the economic fight. I
Right.
mean, after the assassination attempt, there was no opportunity to get things out of the hands of the Friedmans and the Chicago school and the Austrian school and so on. So again, even the whiff of a threat that you're going to challenge the structures and institutions that they're putting in place is very dangerous.
Hmm.
And then along comes Donald Trump.
Yep.
And, he was doing it on a much less threatening level in the first administration. But remember, I don't know if people have put the pieces together now that the story of the Southern Poverty Law Center is out,
Mm.
and the fact that it's creating the Nazis for the purpose of,
Right.
this strategy of tension and so on. We had been anticipating Trump's major infrastructure speech in Ohio, which was happening either the day of Charlottesville or the day after Charlottesville.
Mm.
And his intention was this was going to be a major new initiative to push forward, these kind of nation building policies. Again, shift the emphasis to actual nation building. And
Mm-hmm.
then Charlottesville kicks off, and the entire narrative is hijacked. And honestly, that was like the last time we saw that kind of initiative on the economy
Mm-hmm.
coming out of this administration, because from then on it was playing defense,
Yep.
playing defense, playing
Yep.
defense. You know, but now, we're back. And he's put these policies on steroids where it's not just, okay, I'm going to try and do a couple of good things like rebuild our infrastructure.
Right.
I'm taking down their entire fucking system.
Yep. Yeah.
That's what he's doing.
I love the fact that I'm not the first one to drop an F bomb in the middle of a podcast. It always makes me a little verklempt. But good. I like I mean, because the thing, what's important about all of that, I think, is what you just said, is that look at how um how inspiring it is actually when you start talking about it, right? You start getting emotionally invested in it. You start getting like, and you're like, all right, dude, like, it's like my favorite meme that's out there right now, which is the screaming eagle that says, because fuck you, that's why, right? And it's like, and I'm serious, it's like the best meme out there. There is no other meme that
Yeah,
really,
right.
other than maybe Trump is patent, but like that one, like that's what's happening now. And it does not matter how much you talk or how much you say this, or you try and play this game, or you try and try and get a pawn, try to trade a pawn for a rook and all that. How about,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
how about
exactly.
Brad? Like, well, that's why we're doing this, because we can. And Trump has proven that with both Iranian attacks, which were not messages to Iran, they were messages to Russia, China, and the rest of the world. We haven't even begun to show you what's in the skunk works. I could do an hour podcast on what I think this whole aliens thing is about. To
Hmm.
be honest with you, what I think it is that you're going to see the stuff come out of the skunk works that's going to be real, and it's an order of magnitude away from what people think of as military hardware, and they have to prep the narrative for that. I think that's
Hmm.
probably it
That
more
makes a
than
lot of
anything.
sense to me.
Right. It
I
makes me,
mean,
and it makes more sense to me than this. Dexter White and I were talking about this the other day, and just from and thinking about it in those terms. And I'll make sure that the next time he and I um, do a podcast together, that we talk about this stuff in detail, because that's what you can start to see how you shape. I guess everybody's doing narrative shaping and reality shaping. That's what politics is, folks. But the question is, to what end? Right. And the end here is everything that Susan just laid out. So now let's talk about, can he pull it off? Because that's really the big question in everybody's mind. It's very clear that there's a plan. And anybody who says that plan is 47D chess is, just strategically bereft of thought, right? Or
right.
bereft strategic thought, right?
Yes,
You're just
right.
a moron. Like, okay, that's fine to show me you're a retard without telling me you're a retard, right? So now let's talk about where we are, right? We had a couple of very good pieces of electoral or down
Hmm.
and dirty political success this week, which is where you operate on a regular basis. So let's go through that stuff. Let's get a lay of the electoral map for the midterms, and then I have a couple of other ideas. I know I'm gonna bring into this, and how Trump can secure that map going forward. But let's just talk about redistricting and stuff. So we didn't really get to it the other day when we were on with Crypto Rich. We should probably really dig into the situation on that front. So if you want to take let's go there
Well,
and see.
obviously the two big court, I mean, you've had three big
Mm,
developments. You had the
hmm
court decisions in terms of the redistricting, with the
Right.
Supreme Court saying, no, you can't gerrymander on the basis of racial lines. I was just before we got on, I was reading Jeff Childers' Coffee and COVID.
hmm
I mean, he does a hysterical take on what happened in Tennessee and what was the other state where they went crazy? Alabama? Was it Alabama?
Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're in the middle of a weather emergency, and and they and I mean the Democrats were literally going batshit crazy in both of these places, because this
Doing.
is what you see when when you are so locked and loaded in terms of a psychotic narrative,
hmm
and then somebody busts the narrative. people are just going crazy.
Did you
But,
read the did you read Hakeem Jeffries' statement yesterday he put
I
out
missed
about
yesterday.
about Virginia? I'm moving to
Mm,
Virginia, right?
right.
Because now he's like the Trump administration is denying democracy and the will of the people. Like, no, you held an illegal referendum.
Yeah,
So
right.
like like
And the will of the people are that Virginia's 60-40 Republican, and you just gerrymandered this so there was 10 Democrats and one Republican. Let's talk about the will of the people, okay?
yeah, did you see the map? They
Yeah,
literally had five districts like extend out from Fairfax, which is where they own like where
right.
government
Right.
workers were. Like it's literally the most gerrymandered map of all times. And now you're going to try and play this
Yeah.
perception,
So
and
they
you're going to play the
they they
victim.
lost. Yeah, they lost Virginia. You've got redistricting now in three or four other, I don't know how many states are going to end up actually getting it done.
Hmm.
So, we're talking about at least a 14-point shift for the
Hmm.
Republicans as a result of that. But then the real political punch, of course, is what happened in Indiana, where Trump came in and he strutted his stuff. And he
Yeah.
said, the population is not going to put up with this shit any longer. They wanted redistricting, and these state senators who decided to stay with the old guard, they got their asses handed to them.
Yeah.
And the trad media is sitting there saying, "Oh my God, our narrative isn't true. Trump hasn't lost control of MAGA." Now, as I keep saying, all right, Indiana shows Trump's control of the Republican Party. That is not the same thing as winning midterm elections
No.
in districts that are not, solidly Republican. So we still have a lot of work to do.
Right.
But if we do the work, there is absolutely no reason that we can't secure this and solidify this if enough people, I think, key off what this administration is going to start doing bigly, which is, pounding the drum on what they are doing with the economy.
Hmm.
And they are doing such big stuff. I mentioned in a couple of things I've done the press conference Monday
Mm.
with Brooke Rollins,
Right.
the Ag Secretary, Todd Blanche, the acting AG, and my favorite Peter Navarro, and a bunch of cattle ranchers, where they just went through for people why it is you have to pay, $8 a pound for hamburger at this point because of the control of four big meatpacking cartels, two of which are owned by Brazil. And of course, when you start pulling on the strings of their holding companies and so on, the roads lead right back to London.
Of course.
So I mean, they're not Brazil per se. That just happens to be where the
Right.
franchise headquarters is. Um, and they are going after these cartels and explaining to people, why this is happening. And the cattle ranchers were very, very eloquent in terms of describing how the producers get screwed, the consumers get screwed, and this administration is using some pretty powerful tools, including big, hefty bonuses for whistleblowers
Right.
who are now blowing the whistle on how these big four are colluding with each other, price fixing. And again, it's not just price fixing and the consumer gets screwed. The way this thing has been run for decades is it's reduced our cattle herds to the lowest level since
Hmm.
the 1950s.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder you can't afford hamburger
Right.
because we've killed the supply, which means we've killed our ranchers and our farmers and the basic things that you need to actually be a sovereign nation. So they did this, the problem you have is it was a great press conference. I covered it. I don't know who else covered it, because everybody wants to be fixated on the world of pretend
Hmm.
as opposed to what this administration is actually doing. You mentioned right before we got on what Hegseth announced in terms of the defense
Oh
contractors.
God, it was hilarious. Oh my God, it was
Yeah,
so good.
yeah,
And to pick up on just to pick up the thread, we'll get back to the Hegseth and defense in just a second, but let's pick up on the cattle thing. This is something that I have been writing. I've written about since COVID. Like when they started having to slaughter cattle herds during COVID, I said, well, let's do some replacement math. being a goat farmer at the time, I'm like,
Right.
I'm gonna do some replacement math for you
Right.
on ducks, chickens, pigs, goats, cattle, and I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on because it. And I've argued with people who claim to be cattle ranchers who can't understand basic math that it takes 5 years to replace a heifer that you slaughtered, not from the perspective of the heifer that you slaughtered. No, that takes 2 years, but from the opportunity cost of the meat that didn't make it to market, and from the end end user's perspective, the potential supply of beef from the market has been capped for 5 years.
Right.
You know, if genetics works and every other calf that comes out is a male, right? And you just have to do the math. It's not hard. Same thing with goats. I've been there. I've watched my girls die and then have to try and rebuild my dairy business. And I know exactly how long it takes to replace a lost dairy goat to enterotoxemia or anything else. Like it's not freaking hard, folks. It takes over 2.5 years. You're
Hmm.
done. You're like when it happens, you're done. You're buying new stock, and if there's no new stock to buy, you're out of business. So not only so what I was thinking like in 2025 I'm like okay the cattle herds will start rising again in 2025 after COVID. They're not rising because of what you just talked about. The fact is that the farmers are then the ranchers that have survived are being squoze on the production end and
Right.
we're getting screwed on the top end, and in the middle they're trying to make beef um irrelevant or too expensive for people to buy. And
Right.
then in the first year of the Trump administration, what did they do? They go to our new friends in Argentina, a big beef producing country, and start trying to bring in
Right.
Argentinian beef in order to fill the market. And I'm getting pushback from literal fucking retards on Twitter saying, "Well, if the United States is, if Trump wants to rebuild the cattle herds, why is he importing Argentinian beef? Because he has to, because there's no fucking cows."
Right.
Like
I mean,
this
you
is
say it
not
takes
this
years
is
to
not
rebuild this.
rocket science. Like, what the
Yeah.
fuck is wrong with you? He's trying to get the price of beef down in the short term while we rebuild the herds because it takes forever. Or do you just want
Yeah.
to eat pork? And pork and chicken are not as good for human beings as like ruminant meat is better for our health than scavenger meat.
Hmm.
Chickens and pigs are scavengers or omnivores, whatever. They're poison filters. Whereas cows, goats, sheep, ruminants, elk, deer, they eat grass and they turn low quality grass into high quality food.
Right.
It's fundamentally different. Like I can see it in the way when people take chicken and pork out of their diet that have any kind of gastrointestinal issues. My wife is
Huh.
one of them. I'm one of them. I've noted it. I actually talked to Sean. I actually brought it up to Sean Baker, Dr. Sean Baker, the big beef guy. The body the guy who's like buying eye age and he looks like freaking Adonis. He's cool. I met him down at a podcast they did down in South Florida. I was on with him for about 40 minutes and I brought this up to him. I'm like, you really want to think about you eat beef like all the time. Do you eat beef? You don't eat a lot of chicken and pork, do you? Because you look great.
Hmm.
Chicken and pork is not necessarily as good for you. And there's a reason for that. It's a different type of, and so that's why they're targeting beef, Susan. It's very important
Yeah.
that they're targeting cows. They want us unhealthy. They want the food chain unhealthy on
Right.
purpose. And they want to replace cows with some other vat grown crap that they can, spike protein with and kill us all off with. Fuck
Yeah.
these
Right.
people. I'm not living. I refuse to live like this.
Yeah.
And if it means having to back, creamsicle Mussolini, great. I'm good with that. Like, I'm sorry, this is not hard. So
No, but it's just indicative of, big, I mean, he's going after all the cartels.
yeah,
He's going after the
exactly.
meatpacking cartels. He's going after the health cartels. He's going after the housing cartels in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, big financial institutions buying single family homes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going after the defense cartels, which is what you
Yes.
were referencing with Hegseth. I didn't see that. So,
It's a little 2.5 minute like Pete Hegseth talking over, you know, animation whiteboard, that kind of classic
right,
whiteboard shit. Like it's kind of funny and cool and actually kind of hip. But he's like literally saying, the defense contractors have made you pay for both halves of the process. They make you pay. They make you, the taxpayer, pay for the plant and the production line, and then they charge you for the weapon. And then, like, we're not doing that anymore. They get to build the property, plant, and equipment. We get to give them, and we will give them long-term standing orders for
Right.
weaponry to make it all profitable in the long term. The problem we've had, and this is funny, when I watched that this morning, it was immediately flashing back to conversations I had with military guys when I was up in Calgary, Cornerstone, a couple of patrons who were retired Air Force and others, and we had hour, multi-hour conversations about the process of military procurement, block, how they buy stuff in production blocks and all the rest of it, and explaining, like, once a president or an administration comes in and kills a particular project, it's cheaper for us to redesign the thing and rebuild it from scratch, because once it goes away, it's not like there's a permanent F-22
Right.
production line just sitting out there in Idaho somewhere waiting
Right.
to be re-upped, right? It gets torn down, the tooling goes away, and we have to start all over again. And so when you really want to talk about the pernicious aspects of how deeply, deeply fucking Barack Obama betrayed not only the country, but the military and the taxpayer and everybody else, you have all of these projects, right? These military projects, the F-22, the F-18, many of them come, or the F-30, and hopefully they're trying to do the same thing with the F-35, get to the point where we produce just enough of them, right, that we never you have to write off the first 100 planes, for example, in an Air Force
Hmm.
situation. You got to write off the first 100 planes for testing, training, this,
Right.
that, everything else. That gets added to the cost of the unit cost of all the ones you produce. So the first 100 are a loss. They're a complete write-off. And the 101st is where you're now actually putting one in production. Well, that one costs $35 billion.
Right.
The next one costs $17 billion. The next one costs $8 billion, because you have to amortize across the
Right.
first 100 that you built, right? And so so what Obama kept doing was cutting off these critical weapon systems that we needed
Right.
at the moment of maximal political pain for the Defense Department, to then tell the American people you're getting screwed by using
Right.
this unbelievably retarded military procurement system. It's really evil.
Yeah.
Okay, it's really evil.
It is the
And
military
that's it.
industrial
And
complex.
hopefully Hegseth and Trump and everybody are
Yeah.
changing. And so when we
Yeah.
spend $1.5 trillion on defense this year, we're actually spending $1.5 trillion on weapon systems, not property, plant, and equipment for Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or anybody else. And we actually get what we need, as he put it, what we need for the future, and
Right.
be done with it, and just
Right.
allocate the money and then be done with it. And then we can cut the Defense Department budget after that, because we don't need to, once we've got what we need, we don't need to do this in perpetuity. And this is
Right.
and then I think that's what we're dealing with. I think that's
Yeah.
what we're honestly, I think that's what we're dealing with in terms of long-term restructuring of American government finances in that respect.
Right. And the
So,
other thing that Hegseth announced 2 weeks ago was the
mm,
creation of the Office of Strategic Capital. $2
right,
billion financing mechanism,
right,
so that you can get, because also a lot of the cost is you say, I mean, besides the fact that the procurement system was a complete hustle, but also whenever you're factoring in, and this is, why Navarro talked about the terror premium
mm,
or the terror tax, right? Whenever you're factoring in instability, can I get the financing? Is this system going to get shut down right at the point I'm going to start making a profit? Same thing
mm-hmm,
was true with strategic minerals.
right,
Vance said this when they announced the vault, the Project Vault, where he said, a U.S. company would come in, build a minerals processing facility, go through all the regulatory crap, finally get the thing up and running, and then the Chinese would come in, undercut the market, they'd go bankrupt. There, you just can't operate in an environment of that kind of market controlled instability, which is the whole point of the
right.
free market and the so-called invisible hand. The invisible hand is just the city of London picking your pocket.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
was gonna, and I hate to jump in, but there's another angle on that as well. And then when we do actually produce something profitable, then they spin up the Sierra Club or the Southern Poverty
Right,
Law Center or somebody else to come in and complain about the fucking spotted owl or some shit and shut
right,
it all down.
right,
So no one's going to invest in that level of in that
right.
arena of uncertainty.
Which is why when Trump signed a whole bunch of executive orders a couple of weeks ago under
Mm-hmm.
activating the Defense Production Act, not just for energy production, fossil fuels, nuclear, and so on, but also for generation and transmission, where we're incredibly vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if we lost any of these big transformers, generators, boom, it's going to take years to replace them. But what he said in his finding, activating the Defense Production Act, is the market doesn't support the production of this kind of stuff because some of it is long term. Some of it
Mm-hmm.
is not going to return a profit in the first 5 years. Actually, I was at a manufacturing forum a couple of weeks ago here in Michigan, and very, very, high tech aerospace. And one of the owners of one of the companies was describing what that they were building a new process, revolutionary new way of doing something in terms of aerospace and so on. And how much money they had already invested in it, carrying out this kind of transformation to do something in a new way. They're not going to see a profit for 8 years,
Right.
8 years from now. And they've
Right.
already, I don't know how many years they've been at it. Well, the market punishes that.
Mm-hmm.
The free trade instant, I've got to make a profit and satisfy my shareholders, punishes that. And this
Agreed.
administration is very, very, very conscious of that and is saying, look, we operate from the standpoint of the physical economy. There are things we need. We don't need pot dispensaries, but we need things. We need energy. We need defense production. We need, all sorts of things.
Transformers.
Transformers, we need, strategic minerals processing and so on. So if the market will not support you, we will.
Yeah. Well,
You're going to get the credit, you're going to get the tax structure, you're
right.
going to get the long-term contracts or with the project vault. You're going to know you can get the materials and minerals that you need once you start spinning this up into production, maybe 2, 3 years from now. But you've just locked in the price that you're going to get for the raw materials that you need. That's the American system.
Well, and there's two things I want to bring up, and this is because to build off of what you just talked about, because what you the touching on transformers is really interesting because the other day I got a DM from a long-term patron who works in the energy industry selling transformers and energy solutions to power companies, and he's like, I just got back from a show, and and the production end of it is exploding.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
exploding domestically. It's going to take time. And clearly, it's going to take time in order to get to the point where we're actually doing this on our own. But because Trump has said we're going to do X, and the money is going to be there to do X,
Right.
and you want the AI build out, and he told all the the tech companies, you need to build your own power plants. I'm
Your
like,
own.
you can't do it. Yes, you can.
Yep.
Turns out maybe selling electricity back to the grid as a way of giving back to the community on the cheap is a way to build cachet with your customers and the people that you're like, seriously, like, maybe there's a little bit to that. And then the other thing is that this is very analogous to what you just described with with government lines of credit and whatnot. It's very similar to the 30-year fixed rate
Mm.
mortgage
Right.
that was created. One of the things I do agree with FDR on, now that I see the plan, because what that's actually doing, getting Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship back into into the flow of things where they can operate as a free and unfettered companies to provide proper mortgage credit to the middle class, is that cash flow gets freed up for the small businesses to now be the feeders and the filters and
Right.
I mean, you have to have this is in order to build the big stuff, you have to have all the support system underneath it. You
Right.
can't have the support system underneath it if the middle class can get access to capital
That's
and
right.
credit to build tire shops and to build, tool and die facility, small tool and die shops and rubber plants and this and all the little stuff that needs to be done, the bushings and plating shops and the myriad of companies that need to be built in order to build those supply chains, right? When I was working in the nickel, when I was working as in the metal finishing industry, I was working on the nickel boron project that back from 2005 to 2011 is when I did this, or really 2006 to 2011. That's when I really learned about the Toyota production system, right?
Hmm.
Kaizen and all of that stuff. And what we realize is that what Toyota drove in its quest for quality and a maniacal drive for quality, what it did was it had an immense effect across the entire automotive industry. Because
Right.
guess what? All the automotive producers, all GM, Ford, Jeep, this, every, they all use the same suppliers. They all
Right.
buy their piston rings with the coat with a particular coating on them from the same company. So if you're driving Six Sigma process improvement all the way down the product stack for a Toyota Camry, you're also improving a Buick Encore. You're also
Right.
improving, a Jeep Wrangler and all the rest of it. And so the entire automotive industry was improved tremendously because of Mr. Toyota. And
Because of Edward Deming, Mr. Quality Control.
right. Yeah.
One of the quality control geniuses who my father was a student of. My
Mm-hmm.
father was a quality control guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was this guy Edward Deming, and he approached quality control not from the standpoint of bean counting, but
Right.
quality control from the standpoint of understanding how does the entire production process work,
Yep.
and how do you improve the critical choke points in terms of the entire production process. And he also understood that largely was a result of the workers themselves who were engaged in the production process,
Bingo.
who could then, on the line, they were the ones who would figure out, oh, this is where this thing is being screwed up, and
Yep.
so on.
Yeah,
Um,
no, internally within that company. So when I first got there, my boss, who was the chief metallurgist, and he hired me to do to fix the process. And we used to joke. He's like, so we're gonna change our company name from our company slogan. We're gonna be like Avis, but as opposed to we try harder, which we're XYZ coatings, we try again. Because it was when I got over there, we had a 30% first pass yield, and which is abysmal even for a kind of esoteric coding that we were doing. It was cheaper for us to take the parts in from the client, wrap them in $100 bills with a rubber band, and send them back to the company that uncoated than it was for us to try and code them. That's how bad it was,
right.
right? But then when we had a change in leadership, we started focusing on Six Sigma, putting in just basic Six Sigma process improvement stuff, corrective action reports, basic stuff, going to the guys on the plating line and asking them what's working, what's not working. Why does the nickel strike not work properly? Well, because this
Right.
freaking piece of shit, and we need more power, and we don't have this, and all this, and they told us everything we needed to know. And then I was doing the same thing on the final product itself, getting the path under control, which was a very
Hmm.
difficult path to run. It was like riding a rocket in space because it was
Yeah, right.
literally I was using sodium borohydride, so it was literally dealing with rocket fuel as the reducing agent. It was crazy, right? Like this insane thing, but we did it. And
Yeah,
by the time we were done, we were 2 orders of Pareto better than everybody else in the
right.
business. We
Exactly.
had a 99% first pass yield by the time I got done, when the
Yeah.
industry average is 90. Like it was,
Well, that
it was,
reminds me of an amazing story my father told me. Um, because he was the plant that he worked at did bumpers, coil springs, and torsion bars,
mm-hmm,
right? And at one point he said they changed the shape. The bumpers used to just be bumpers, right?
right,
With a purpose, right? You're supposed to protect the car,
right,
but then Madison Avenue and GM, of course, would always be the first, wants the bumpers to look fancy,
right.
right? So they changed the shape of the bumpers.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed that because you changed the shape of the bumpers, the plating process didn't work, right? There was a physical
Yeah,
shape
yeah,
to it. And
mm-hmm.
just the fact that you changed the shape So they were getting all sorts of bump, uh,
Recalls. Yeah.
customers
Yep.
complaining about the bumpers.
Hmm.
And my father went to management and said, "We have to do something about this. We have to fix it." And they said, "No, we've done the calculations. We're better off just, replacing the bumper with another bad bumper to satisfy the consumer than actually changing our process."
Right.
And he said to me, I was not proud of that because it's precisely this
Hmm.
question of, is the accounting office going to run your operation, which is the equivalent of having the British East India Company and the Bank of England run your
Hmm.
operations? It's all about loot, extraction, and profit. Or you're going to have people who actually want to produce, make the world a better place. And that's what Trump is doing. And that just gets us right back to our theme of, pretend versus the real world. Trump is dragging this planet back into the real world.
Hmm.
And some people are going to be happy. Some people will be happy later, and
Yep.
some people will never be happy.
Well, this is another. It's another sad commentary. That commentary. It's all, when you were talking about your dad's story, all I could think of was, what did he do? What did Edward Norton do in Fight Club? What did he do for a living? Right? He assessed, whether, he assessed whether they should change the problem in a car, whether how, depending on how many, whether insurance payouts versus number of people
Right,
killed. Right. And they
right.
just terrible calculation. And of course it destroyed him, and he
Yeah,
created a psychotic break in him. And then we wind up with the movie. Right. So, um, the other thing I was thinking is one of the things that I hate about our current system, and one of the things about the current system that we're trying to change, and this is important, it's about time. So the bean counters are saying it's cheaper to replace the bumper, but it's not, because there's a net loss to everybody. It's like the broken window fallacy writ large again. Oh, we'll
right.
just window and we'll create GDP by to for window builders. Like, no, the window makers. No, there's a time loss for the person who bought the car, expecting that car to not be a problem for them in the future, and they don't want to
Hmm.
waste their time
Right,
having to get their bumper replaced because
right.
like
Which is why
somebody
when
has,
Toyota goes back to quality control, people say, shit, I'm not going to buy a Ford any longer. I'm going to buy a Toyota.
and to this day, even though Toyota's quality has come down because Davos has destroyed cars, everybody's still willing to pay the Toyota tax when they walk into a dealership, because
Right.
the last 40 years, Toyotas have been the gold standard in terms of quality, even though they aren't anymore. And
Hmm.
other manufacturers who got the bad rep have improved their quality, and you fight, and you go
Right.
to a dealership and you're fighting it constantly, and they all fight amongst themselves for and what is effectively a shrinking piece of the market, a piece of the shrinking market. And you're just watching this all play out, and I'm like, no, this is why I drive a Nissan truck and not a Tacoma, by the way, because the Frontier is a better truck and it's cheaper, and I won't pay the Tacoma tax because it's stupid, right? But understand that, and I've talked to Toyota mechanics about this. I've talked to Toyota loyalists about this. I talked to people who work at Toyota, and they're all like, "Yeah, it's not the same. It
Hmm.
hasn't been the same since just before COVID, and it's because of the war on transportation and the war on quality has been that it's all planned obsolescence at every level.
Hmm.
From washing machines to
Oh,
cars,
yeah.
everything, and like it's all designed to put you to turn
You
the
can't
world
buy an
into.
analog washing machine anymore.
Yeah, no, well, mostly analog. The closest ones are Speed Queens.
Closest, but
This,
I was
yeah, I
looking
know.
into it, but they're no longer totally analog like they used to be.
Only the commercial ones are, and you have
Right.
to, like, so if you want to buy a washing machine, you gotta buy a commercial grade one. They're hideously expensive. They got a mechanical clutch on them, and they're awesome, and you're gonna be willing it to
They'll
your
last longer than
dog.
I will.
Yes, exactly. I know. So we actually, when we replaced our washing machine 3 or 4 years ago, we actually replaced with the Speed Queen, right? And but yeah, no, this is all very, very important, that their business model, Susan, can be described in one phrase: your life as a service.
Yeah.
That's it. Software as a service. This is a service. As they just want to put everybody on a subscription, and a residual poison tap. That's all it is. And
Hmm.
Trump is saying no. I know I've had a couple of discussions with Alex Craner about this very thing. Is like we want a return to beauty and
Yeah.
quality, not
Yeah.
quantity. They're
Right.
thinking quantity, we are thinking quality, and we can produce fewer things of higher quality and buy them once and never buy them
Right.
again.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's this question of, when people start thinking as producers instead of consumers. It's a
Right.
complete mind shift.
Mm-hmm.
I've described our experience going to the auto plants in 23 during the strike. And it
Mm-hmm.
didn't matter if you were at a suburban plant or if you were at the plant in downtown Detroit, which was largely Black and Hispanic, workers. The
Mm-hmm.
level of support for Trump was the same. And it didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman.
Right.
I mean, the demographic where Trump has the worst trouble is Black women, in the inner cities, right? That's not true at the auto plants.
Right.
The Black women had the same level of support for Trump as the Black or the white men because they were producers
Right.
and they weren't making their decisions from the standpoint of being a victim,
Right.
or a loser. They were making their decisions from the standpoint of, I have some command over how the world works. There's a real world. I have some command over it. I know that because I actually build a car. And I'm going to make my decisions from the standpoint of the real world. And in that world, it's a slam dunk. Of course, you're going to vote for Donald Trump. So the more people we can draw into that way of thinking, honestly, the less work we're going to have to do in the midterms because
Yeah,
they're going to do
no,
it naturally.
seriously. And I agreed. And this is why, I mean, from a strategic standpoint, we maybe 5 minutes, we'll wrap it up here to say what strategically he has to do is obviously move out of extend and pretend and into we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. But he still has time, I think, because it's so only May. And everybody
Yeah,
who's like trying to tell you that, oh my God, the midterm started in January of 2025, um, needs to go, they need to go fuck off because it's
right.
it's it's it's
Which is
retarded.
why he's having a midterm convention in September, where the Republican Party, what does the midterm convention mean? You're not picking candidates. It
Right,
is going to be one gigantic, this is what we've done, folks.
right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And Donald Trump is many things. Um, you can like him, not like him. You can question his, um, you know, uh, his method, and you cannot. The one thing you cannot question is his ability to understand the media cycle. There is nobody
Right.
in the on, in history who has been better at understanding media than Donald Trump. And so if he says September, who am I to say he's wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But this is the guy with a podcast. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? At the end of the day, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we all have our areas of expertise. We're all supposedly subject matter experts in whatever it is that we're supposed to be subject matter experts in. But reality is that he's a subject matter expert in that.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and that's not trusting the plan, folks. That's just looking
Strategy.
at facts. It's just looking at facts.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's good at manipulating the media. You hate him for it, but guess what?
Yeah.
You know. So you should get good at it if you want to. You should, as the Zoomer often like to say, "Hey, how about you get good and win?" Like
Yeah. Right.
I've raised one. I know exactly what that looks like, and I'm like, yeah, why don't you get good and win?
Yeah. Right. Not
Mm.
tired of it.
So, all right, I think this has been. I think we covered everything we need to cover. Is there anything else you want?
Yeah, we went some places probably we didn't expect, but it was fun.
That's the way good conversations are supposed to be.
That's right.
So,
Exactly.
all
All
right,
right.
Susan. So why don't you give everybody a short plug on your way out the door, and then we'll wrap this thing up and move on.
All right. Well, go to prometheanaction.com, sign up for our free newsletter, follow our videos, but also you can go to prometheanpack.com where we run midterm boot camps,
Mm,
national Zoom discussions every 2 weeks to tune people up with this message about Trump's economic revolution as the spear point for the midterm message.
good. And as always, I'm TFL 1728. She's SJ Kokinda on
On
Twitter. I
X.
am
Yep.
on X. I am TFL 1728, where I'm doing brawling every day because it's bite me. It's fun. And because fuck you, that's why. And Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns is how we pay the bills. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.